The massive chamber of the Galactic Council had never felt so cold and empty. Representatives from 300 different alien worlds sat frozen in their seats, staring at the giant holographic screen floating in the center of the room. Red dots blinked across the star map like a spreading disease, marking system after system going completely dark. Each red dot meant billions of lives lost, entire civilizations wiped out in mere hours. The Devourers were back. These weren't ordinary enemies that could be reasoned with or fought using normal tactics. They were ancient machines older than most civilizations in the galaxy that had been sleeping for over 1,000 years. Now they were awake and hungry. Their black ships moved through space like locusts, stripping planets bare of all resources and life to power their endless growth. Wherever they went, they left behind nothing but empty rock floating in the void. Admiral Thekvar of the Altarian fleet was the first to break the terrible silence. His 4 arms were trembling as he spoke, something that shocked everyone present. The Altarians were known throughout the galaxy as fearless warriors who had never backed down from any fight. If they were scared, the situation was truly hopeless. "Friends, we must face the truth," Thekvar said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Our combined fleets are no match for their technology. These machines learn from every battle. They adapt to our weapons within hours of first contact. What kills them today becomes useless tomorrow." Around the chamber, heads nodded in grim agreement. The Centurions, who had ruled the galaxy's military forces for over 2,000 years, had sent their most powerful battle group to stop the Devourers just 3 weeks ago. All 50 ships had been destroyed without taking down a single enemy vessel. The survivors reported that the Devourer ships had somehow absorbed their weapon strikes and turned that energy back against them. Even more disturbing was what had happened to the Valdris. These beings could move objects with their minds, read thoughts across vast distances, and bend reality itself to their will. They were the closest things to gods that most species had ever encountered. But when they tried to use their psychic powers against the Devourers, nothing happened. The machines had some kind of protection that made them completely immune to mental attacks. One by one, representatives from the galaxy's most powerful civilizations stood up to admit defeat. The crystal beings of Nexus Prime, who could calculate battle outcomes with perfect accuracy, declared the war mathematically impossible to win. The energy creatures of the Void Nebula, who existed as pure thought and could travel faster than light itself, reported that even they couldn't find any weakness in the Devourer fleet formations. The mood in the chamber grew darker with each admission of failure. Some representatives were already talking about evacuation plans, discussing which systems might be far enough away to escape the coming destruction. Others spoke of hiding in deep space until the Devourers moved on to other galaxies, though nobody knew if that would ever happen. In the far back corner of the chamber, almost hidden behind larger alien delegates, sat Ambassador Minseo Park. She represented the Human Confederation, one of the newest members of the Galactic Council. Humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 52 years ago and had been part of galactic politics for less than 50 years. Most of the older species still considered them primitive newcomers who barely deserved a seat at the table. Human technology was generations behind the galactic standard. Their ships were slow and clunky compared to sleek alien vessels. Their weapons were basic energy blasters and simple missiles, nothing like the reality-warping devices used by advanced civilizations. Most aliens saw humans as brave but foolish, the kind of species that would charge into battle without thinking about the consequences. As despair filled the chamber like a toxic cloud, Minseo slowly stood up. She was a small woman by human standards, barely reaching the shoulder height of most aliens present. Her simple blue uniform looked plain next to the elaborate costumes and natural features of other delegates. But something in her posture caught attention across the room. The Human Confederation volunteers to lead the defense of the galaxy, she announced in a clear, steady voice that somehow carried to every corner of the vast chamber. For a moment, complete silence returned. Then, almost as if a dam had burst, desperate laughter began echoing off the walls. It wasn't cruel laughter, but the kind that comes when fear meets absurdity. Here was a species that could barely defend their own small corner of space, offering to save civilizations that had ruled the stars for millions of years. But Minseo didn't sit down or take back her words. She stood there calmly, waiting for the laughter to die down, her eyes moving from one delegate to another, and slowly, very slowly, the laughter began to fade as representatives started to wonder if this small human woman might know something they didn't. 3 days after that fateful meeting at the Galactic Council, Captain Jae-ho Kim stood on the bridge of the human flagship Indomitable, staring out at what could barely be called a fleet. The view was both inspiring and terrifying at the same time. 200 human ships floated in formation around them, ranging from massive military cruisers to converted cargo haulers that had been hastily fitted with weapons. Mixed among them were whatever vessels their alien allies could spare, without leaving their own worlds completely defenseless. It wasn't an impressive sight by galactic standards. The entire human fleet could have fit inside some of the massive Centurion battleships that the Devourers had already destroyed. Most of the human vessels looked rough and practical rather than sleek and advanced. Their hulls were thick and sturdy, built for long journeys rather than elegant combat maneuvers. Compared to the flowing, artistic designs of alien warships, human ships looked like flying toolboxes. Captain Jae-ho had been studying the tactical reports all morning, and the numbers were depressing. He turned to Ambassador Minseo Park, who had taken command of the entire operation despite having no military training. The weight of the galaxy's survival rested on her shoulders, but she seemed strangely calm about the whole situation. Ambassador Park, I need to be honest with you about our situation, Jae-ho said, his voice heavy with concern. Our weapons technology is at least 3 generations behind what the Devourers are using. While they have plasma cannons that can tear through solid metal like paper, we're still using basic energy blasters and explosive missiles. Our shields are even worse off. Intelligence reports suggest that our defensive barriers won't last more than a few minutes under direct fire from their main weapons. He pulled up a holographic display showing the technical specifications of both fleets. The differences were staggering. Devourer ships could move twice as fast as human vessels. Their weapons had 3 times the range, and their defenses could absorb punishment that would vaporize human ships instantly. On paper, it looked like a fight between medieval knights and modern tanks. Minseo studied the display for a long moment, then did something unexpected. She smiled. Not a worried or forced smile, but a genuine expression of confidence that seemed completely out of place given their desperate situation. Captain Kim, you're thinking about this all wrong, she said, walking over to the main communication console. Every species that fought the Devourers tried to beat them at their own game. They built bigger ships, more powerful weapons, stronger shields. They turned it into a contest of raw technology and firepower. She activated the fleet-wide communication system, her voice suddenly carrying to every ship in their makeshift armada. Human crews stopped their preparations to listen, while alien commanders leaned forward in anticipation of hearing the plan that would somehow save them all. All ships. This is Ambassador Park speaking. I want everyone to understand something important about why we're here. We're not here to win through superior firepower because we don't have it. We're not here to win through advanced technology because we don't have that either. We're here to win through superior stubbornness, and that's something we have in abundance. The communication channels buzzed with confused chatter. Alien commanders asked their human counterparts to explain what the ambassador meant. Even some human captains seemed puzzled by the strategy. Minseo continued her broadcast, her voice growing stronger and more determined. The Devourers are machines. They think like machines. They expect logical, predictable responses to their attacks. Every civilization they've faced has fought them the same way. Head-on battles with the biggest weapons they could build. That's exactly what these machines are designed to counter. The plan she outlined was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of trying to match Devourer technology, humans would use guerrilla warfare tactics. They would break their fleet into small, fast-moving groups that could strike quickly and disappear before the enemy could respond effectively. Rather than protecting territory, they would focus on disrupting Devourer operations and supply lines. Think of it like this. Mincio explained to the gathered fleet commanders during a strategy meeting. A pack of wolves doesn't try to fight a bear head-on. They circle around it, taking small bites, wearing it down until it can't fight back anymore. We're the wolves and the devourers are the bear. The first real test of this strategy came at Kepler Station, a massive trading hub that the devourers needed to capture to fuel their continued advance. Previous battles had followed a predictable pattern. Alien fleets would form up in traditional battle formations and engage the devourers in direct combat until they were overwhelmed and destroyed. But when the human fleet arrived at Kepler Station, they did something completely different. Instead of forming a battle line, the ships scattered in all directions like leaves blown by the wind. Some headed for the outer system to attack devourer supply convoys. Others moved to strike at isolated enemy ships that had separated from the main fleet. A few brave crews even attempted boarding actions against damaged devourer vessels, something no other species had ever tried. The results were chaotic, but effective. The devourers, programmed to respond to conventional fleet tactics, found themselves confused by the unpredictable human behavior. Their advanced targeting systems were designed to track large formations, not dozens of individual ships moving in seemingly random patterns. When the devourers adapted their tactics to counter the human approach, something remarkable happened. The humans adapted faster. Within hours of each devourer adjustment, human commanders were already implementing new strategies, changing their attack patterns, trying completely different approaches. This became the defining characteristic of human warfare against the devourers. Where other species had rigid military doctrines developed over thousands of years, humans were willing to throw out the rulebook and try anything that might work. They were unpredictable, stubborn, and absolutely refused to give up, no matter how badly outnumbered they were. 6 months of brutal warfare had passed since the humans first took on the impossible task of fighting the devourers. The cost had been devastating beyond anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The human fleet, that had once numbered 200 ships, was now down to barely 100 functional vessels. Many of those remaining ships were held together with emergency repairs and sheer determination, their hulls scarred by plasma burns and patched with whatever materials the crews could find. Every single day brought news of more losses. The communication channels constantly carried reports of human ships that had been destroyed while protecting evacuation convoys, or holding defensive positions against overwhelming odds. Captain Jae-ho Kim's daily briefings to Ambassador Minseo Park had become somber affairs, each one a longer list of friends and colleagues who would never return home. But something strange was happening on the other side of the conflict. Intelligence. Reports from across the galaxy showed that the Devourer advance, which had initially moved like an unstoppable flood, was beginning to slow down. Where they had once consumed entire systems in days, now it took them weeks to fully strip a single planet. Their fleets, which should have been growing stronger with each victory, seemed to be spreading thinner across more territory. Admiral Tekvar, commanding the Altarian observation fleet from a safe distance, watched the human tactics with a mixture of horror and fascination. His species had studied warfare for thousands of years, developing complex theories about acceptable loss ratios and strategic retreats. What the humans were doing violated every principle of rational military thinking. Just yesterday, he had witnessed a single human destroyer deliberately ram itself into a devourer supply ship to prevent it from reaching a besieged colony world. The collision had destroyed both vessels instantly, but it had bought enough time for 3 million civilians to evacuate to safety. By any logical calculation, trading a warship and its crew of 200 for the lives of 3 million non-combatants was a good exchange. But watching it happen felt like witnessing madness. "They're completely insane," Tekvar muttered to his aide while reviewing the battle reports. "No rational species would sustain losses like this. They've lost half their fleet, and yet they keep fighting as if they're winning." His aide, a younger Altarian who had been studying human military history, offered a different perspective. "Sir, I think that's exactly why they're still in the fight. Every other species calculates when the cost becomes too high and retreats to preserve their forces. Humans seem to calculate how much damage they can do before they're completely destroyed. then try to maximize that damage. The evidence supported this observation. Human ships weren't just fighting until they were defeated. They were fighting until they were literally unable to continue. Crews would keep firing weapons even as their ships were breaking apart around them. When their main engines failed, they would use emergency thrusters to ram enemy vessels. When their weapons ran out of power, they would attempt boarding actions, with nothing but personal firearms and explosive charges. This relentless approach was having an unexpected effect on the Devourer forces. The machines had been programmed to account for normal military behavior, where damaged enemies would retreat to fight another day. But humans didn't retreat. They kept fighting until they were physically destroyed, which meant the Devourers had to commit far more resources to completely eliminate each human force. What should have been quick, decisive victories were turning into prolonged battles that drained Devourer resources. Instead of the usual pattern of overwhelming a system and moving on, they were having to leave behind garrison forces to prevent human survivors from continuing to cause problems. Supply lines that should have been secure were under constant attack from human ships that appeared out of nowhere, struck fast, and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. So Young, Lee had been working in a makeshift laboratory aboard the human research vessel Discovery, studying fragments of Devourer technology that brave crews had managed to recover from battlefields. Most alien scientists had assumed the Devourers were purely artificial intelligences, advanced computer programs running on incredibly sophisticated hardware. But Dr. Lee had noticed something that everyone else had missed, hidden deep within. The quantum processors that served as Devourer brains were tiny biological components, actual living tissue that seemed to be integrated with the mechanical systems. At first she thought it might be some kind of organic computing material, but further analysis revealed something far more significant. "They're not purely machines," she announced during an emergency briefing with the human fleet commanders. Her voice was excited, almost breathless with the implications of her discovery. "There's an organic component controlling their collective consciousness. It's like a biological nervous system that coordinates all their actions across vast distances." The discovery changed everything about how humans understood their enemy. The Devourers weren't just advanced robots following programmed instructions. They were a hybrid of organic and artificial intelligence, with living tissue serving as the control mechanism for their vast machine armies. More importantly, biological systems could be disrupted in ways that pure machines could not. Dr. Lee had identified the relay stations that the Devourers used to maintain communication across their network. These stations weren't just transmitting data. They were actually extending the organic nervous system that controlled the entire collective consciousness. If those relay stations could be destroyed or disrupted, it would create chaos in the Devourer ranks. Human forces immediately began targeting these communication nodes with focused attacks. The results were dramatic and immediate. Each successful strike against a relay station created confusion among nearby Devourer forces, causing them to operate independently rather than as part of a coordinated whole. Ships would stop mid-attack to await new orders that never came. Supply convoys would get lost without central guidance. Entire fleets would become paralyzed, waiting for instructions from a command network that was no longer functioning. The Devourers were forced to commit increasing numbers of ships to defend their communication infrastructure instead of advancing their conquest of new systems. For the first time since the war began, the momentum was shifting in favor of the defenders. The war had been raging for over a year when human intelligence finally located the source of all their problems. Deep in Devourer-controlled space, hidden behind layers of defensive fleets and automated weapon platforms, sat the Nexus. This wasn't just another enemy base or factory ship. The Nexus was a massive artificial structure, larger than most moons, that served as the central brain controlling every single Devourer unit across the galaxy. For thousands of years, every major civilization had known about the Nexus and had attempted to destroy it. The Centurions had thrown their most powerful battle fleets at it during their golden age, only to watch their ships be torn apart by defenses that seemed to predict every move before it was made. The psychic Valdris had tried to attack it mentally, but their most powerful telepaths had been driven insane by the alien thoughts they encountered. Even the ancient progenitor race, who had built most of the galaxy's current technology, had failed to breach its defenses before mysteriously disappearing from history. The structure itself was a nightmare of organic and mechanical design. Massive tentacle-like appendages extended from a central core that pulsed with sickly, bioluminescent light. These appendages weren't just decorative, they were the physical manifestation of the communication network that Dr. So-Young Lee had discovered. Every order, every piece of information, every coordinated movement of the Devourer forces flowed through these organic conduits. Ambassador Minseo Park stood before the assembled fleet commanders in the main briefing room of the Indomitable. Representatives from dozens of species had gathered to hear the human plan for ending the war. After months of successful raids against communication relays, the Devourer network was weakening, but it wasn't enough. As long as the Nexus remained operational, the enemy could eventually rebuild and recover. Friends and allies, Minseo began, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had fought for. We've reached the point where half measures won't work anymore. The Nexus has to be dealt with, and we all know that conventional attacks have failed for millennia. Admiral Thekvar leaned forward in his chair, his forearms crossed skeptically. Ambassador, with all due respect to human courage, every species in this room has lost fleets trying to crack that fortress. What makes you think we can succeed where our ancestors failed? Minseo's response surprised everyone in the room. We're not going to destroy the Nexus, she announced calmly. We're going to capture it. The silence that followed was deafening. Capture the Nexus? The idea was so audacious that most of the alien commanders thought they had misheard. The structure was defended by thousands of automated weapons, energy barriers that had never been breached, and swarms of Devourer ships that responded to threats with mechanical precision. But Minseo wasn't finished explaining. Dr. Lee's research has shown us that the Nexus isn't just a communication hub, it's the actual brain of the entire Devourer collective. If we can get inside and reprogram that consciousness, we can turn their own network against them. Instead of coordinating attacks against us, it would coordinate attacks against itself. The plan she outlined was breathtakingly complex and dangerous. The main fleet, now reinforced with ships and technology from every species in the Galactic Council, would launch a massive frontal assault on the Nexus defenses. This wasn't intended to actually breach the fortress. It was a distraction, designed to draw every Devourer ship and weapon system into a single, massive battle. While this largest space battle in galactic history raged outside, a small force of human Marines would attempt something that had never been tried before. Using captured Devourer technology and stealth systems provided by their alien allies, they would infiltrate the Nexus through maintenance conduits and service tunnels that were too small for the automated defenses to monitor effectively. Once inside, they would have to fight their way to the central consciousness chamber while Dr. So-Young Lee and her team of technicians attempted to hack into a biological computer system that was older than most civilizations. They would have one chance to upload a virus that would rewrite the fundamental programming of every Devourer unit in the galaxy. The preparation for this final assault took 3 months. Human ships that had been patched and repaired dozens of times were completely rebuilt, using the most advanced technology their allies could provide. Altarian armor plating was welded to human hulls. Valdris psychic amplifiers were integrated into communication systems. Centurion weapons were mounted alongside human missile launchers. The result was a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human engineering practicality combined with alien technological sophistication created warships that were both incredibly tough and surprisingly elegant. These weren't the converted cargo haulers and hastily armed civilian ships that humans had started the war with. These were proper warships, built for the single most important battle in galactic history. The assault began with a coordination that would have been impossible at the start of the war. Hundreds of ships from dozens of different species moved. As one, their attacks synchronized with precision that impressed even the militaristic Centurions. Human commanders had learned to integrate the unique capabilities of each allied species into their battle plans. The Devourers responded exactly as predicted, throwing everything they had at the attacking fleet. The space around the Nexus became a deadly light show of energy weapons, explosive missiles, and the brilliant flashes of ships being destroyed. This was warfare on a scale that dwarfed every previous battle in galactic history. But this time, the humans weren't fighting to win through superior firepower. Every ship that engaged the enemy, every weapon fired, every life lost was calculated for maximum strategic impact. Human captains had learned to sacrifice their vessels not in desperate last stands, but in precise tactical moves that created opportunities for their allies. The diversionary battle raged for hours while deep inside the Nexus, human Marines fought their way through corridors that had never known organic life, carrying with them the hopes of every free civilization in the galaxy. The interior of the Nexus was unlike anything the human Marines had ever experienced. Sergeant Dong-hyun Choi led his squad through corridors that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The walls weren't made of metal or concrete, but of some organic material that felt warm to the touch and seemed to breathe around them. Strange. Lights flickered beneath the surface, and occasionally they could hear what sounded like whispers in languages that had never been spoken by any living throat. These weren't normal hallways designed for people to walk through. They were more like the inside of some massive creature's circulatory system, with passages that curved and twisted in ways that hurt to look at. The Marines had to crawl through some sections, while others opened into vast chambers filled with machinery that defied description. Everything was connected by those pulsing organic conduits that Dr. So-Young Lee had identified as the Devourer Communication Network. Behind Dong-hyun, 12 of the toughest Marines humanity could produce carried equipment that represented the combined scientific knowledge of dozens of alien civilizations. Dr. So-Young Lee was among them, her face pale but determined as she clutched the portable computer containing the virus that could end this war. The device looked ridiculously small compared to the vast alien intelligence they were trying to defeat, but it contained humanity's last hope. The deeper they went into the Nexus, the more obvious it became that they were walking through the physical manifestation of an alien mind. The walls around them pulsed in rhythm with thoughts too vast and alien for human comprehension. Sometimes the Marines would pause, feeling dizzy and nauseous as fragments of the Devourer consciousness brushed against their own minds. It was like walking through the dreams of a sleeping god, except this god was very much awake and increasingly aware of their presence. "Movement ahead," whispered Private Jinwoo Park, who was on point. Through his helmet camera, the rest of the squad could see mechanical shapes emerging from alcoves in the walls. These weren't the massive Devourer ships they had been fighting in space. These were smaller, more agile defenders designed specifically for internal security. They moved with spider-like grace, their multiple limbs ending in weapons that hummed with deadly energy. The firefight that followed was intense but brief. Human weapons designed for fighting other humans shouldn't have been effective against advanced alien technology, but the Marines had learned to be creative during their months of warfare. They used explosive charges to bring down sections of ceiling, trapping some defenders. They fired at the organic conduits running through the walls, causing feedback loops that confused the mechanical defenders. Most importantly, they never stopped moving toward their objective. "All units converge on the core," Dong-hyun commanded over the comm system as more defenders poured into the corridor ahead of them. "Dr. Lee needs more time to complete the upload." The central core of the Nexus was a vast chamber that defied physics and sanity in equal measure. At its center floated a sphere of organic material the size of a small building, covered in millions of tiny lights that flickered in patterns too complex for human eyes to follow. This was the brain of the Devourer collective consciousness, the single point from which billions of machine units across the galaxy received their orders. Dr. So-Young worked frantically at a control interface that seemed to grow from the floor itself. Her hands moved over alien symbols that shifted and changed as she touched them, the device learning her intentions and adapting to help her work. The virus upload was proceeding, but slowly. Every few seconds she would glance up at the progress indicator and wince at how much work remained. Around the chamber, Dong-hyun's Marines had taken defensive positions as wave after wave of mechanical defenders poured in. These weren't the relatively simple units they had fought in the corridors. These were the Nexus's final guardians, machines designed to protect the core at any cost. They came in shapes that had never been seen before. Some crawled along, the walls like metallic insects. Others flew through the air trailing energy weapons, and still others seemed to phase in and out of reality itself. The battle was brutal and desperate. Marines fell one by one, their sacrifice buying precious minutes for Dr. Lee to complete her work. Private Park took a plasma blast to the chest while holding a choke point that 3 defenders were trying to break through. Corporal Minjun Song used his last grenade to collapse a section of wall, burying himself and 4 enemy units under tons of alien metal. Each loss hit the surviving Marines hard, but they never wavered in their mission. Above them, the space battle continued to rage with unprecedented fury. Through the Nexus's transparent sections, they could see the flashes of exploding ships and the brilliant beams of energy weapons cutting through the darkness. Human vessels, now bearing the scars of over a year of continuous warfare, fought alongside the most advanced ships in the galaxy against an enemy that had seemed invincible just months ago. Captain Jae-ho Kim, commanding the Indomitable in the thick of the battle, watched as ship after ship made the ultimate sacrifice to keep the Devourer forces distracted. A human destroyer deliberately positioned itself between a damaged Altarian cruiser and 3 enemy vessels, absorbing fire that would have destroyed the alien ship. The destroyer was torn apart in seconds, but its sacrifice allowed the Altarian vessel to escape and continue fighting. This was the pattern that had defined human warfare from the beginning. Where other species calculated odds and retreated when the mathematics turned against them, humans calculated how much damage they could do before they were destroyed, and then tried to maximize that damage. It was a philosophy that made no sense to logical minds, but it was winning the war. "Upload complete," Dr. Lee announced suddenly, her voice barely audible over the sound of weapons fire. "The virus is spreading through their network." The effect was immediate and dramatic. The mechanical defenders in the core chamber suddenly stopped moving, their lights flickering in confusion as conflicting orders flooded their systems. Across the galaxy, the same thing was happening to every Devourer unit. The virus wasn't just disrupting their communications, it was rewriting their fundamental programming, turning their own coordination system into a weapon against them. Ships that had been advancing on human positions suddenly turned and began attacking each other. Supply convoys started destroying their own cargo. Entire fleets went dark as their command systems collapsed under the weight of contradictory instructions. The Devourer collective consciousness, which had been their greatest strength, became their ultimate weakness as it turned against itself. Ambassador Min Seo Park stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching through the view screen as the last Devourer ships around the Nexus powered down and went dark. The massive fortress itself was shutting down section by section, its organic lights fading as the alien intelligence that had controlled it died. Communication channels across the fleet suddenly came alive with voices from every corner of the galaxy. Species that had been silent for months, hiding in fear from the Devourer advance, were reporting that the enemy forces in their systems had stopped functioning. There were cheers, tears, and expressions of gratitude in 100 different languages. As the news spread that the war was finally over, humanity had achieved the impossible. They had defeated an enemy that had conquered civilizations for thousands of years, not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through simple courage and an absolute refusal to surrender. When future generations asked how humans succeeded, where the galaxy's greatest civilizations had failed, the answer would always be the same. They were the only species stubborn enough to keep fighting when all hope seemed lost.